So, September was a very interesting reading month for me for a few different reasons. First off, I only ended up reading 3 books, but one of them was very lengthy. It was the size of like 3 average books, so that one took me a couple of weeks to read. And then, not only that, they're all 3 very different from each other, and then also none of them were actually physical books, which is very odd for me because I do enjoy reading a good physical book, but for some reason, I did not end up reading a single physical book in September. But the first book that I did read was one that I borrowed from my library, and that was the audiobook for I Hate Everyone Except You by Clinton Kelly. This one was Clinton Kelly's memoir. If you don't know who Clinton Kelly was, what did I just say was? If you don't know who Clinton Kelly is, he was the gentleman on What Not to Wear. I also believe he's done some talk shows or something like that too. But anyway, this was just his memoir, and it was a very lighthearted, don't take life too seriously kind of memoir. And it was also very short. I definitely enjoyed it. I do not rate memoirs just because I don't feel comfortable rating people's life stories. But this one was super funny. I laughed like a bunch. He did an amazing job at narrating it, and it was just overall a really fun time. I do recommend this one if you're into kind of more lighthearted memoirs, especially the audiobook. I feel like in this case, the audiobook was probably the best experience to consume this particular memoir, just because he did such a phenomenal job at narrating it. So then I read an arc, which was King of the Forgotten Darkness by Eric Goodwin. This one is a fantasy, and it was a super fun time. The world in it was absolutely breathtaking. Eric Goodwin obviously put so much time and effort into creating this super intricate and magical world called Erentir. So this book follows a young man named Liam, and he lived in Erentir as a child, but he ended up escaping when there was a brutal war happening, and he believed his entire family was slaughtered. And the world he escaped into is super peaceful and full of AI and super cool futuristic technology. So he decides to keep his past in the past and live kind of a normal life in this new peaceful world. But then he discovers that one of his family members might actually still be alive, and so he has to go back to Erentir and try to help them. I definitely love that from the very beginning you realize that Liam is very self-aware. He is very aware of his trauma and kind of what triggers it, and also believes in therapy and stuff like that, which is very refreshing, especially for a fantasy novel. So definitely a really great main character right off the bat. And then also right off the bat, you kind of are plunged directly into the story. It's not one of those fantasies where you kind of have to trudge through the first like 50 pages trying to make sense of what the heck is going on. This book is so fast-paced, and it does not take long at all to pick up on everything. You're not like information dumped right in the first chapter, so that's really great. I love just being plunged into the story. And I also really loved the writing style. It was the perfect amount of detailed writing where you can picture things vividly in your mind, but you're not like overloaded with so much detail that it gets boring, if that makes sense. The only complaint I have about this book is that I wish it had been longer, but I guess that's kind of a good complaint to have about a book if you wish it were longer, because obviously that means you just want to keep reading it. So with all of that being said, I did end up rating this one 4 stars. I really enjoyed the experience of reading this arc. It was so much fun. So I definitely recommend this book to anybody who's into fantasy, especially stuff like The Lord of the Rings or Narnia, where you're kind of transported into a magical world that's not our own. If you're into that stuff, this is going to be right up your alley. And I do believe it's coming out in April of 2025, so you can pre-order it on Amazon. And as always, I'm going to keep the links of all of these books that I talk about in my description box. So if you're interested, that's where you can find it. And then last, I read Helter Skelter by Vincent Bugliosi. This book was a mammoth of a book. Very lengthy, very full of information, but interesting information, I might add. Absolutely massive, and I did not know that going into it, so initially I borrowed it from my library thinking that I could finish it before it was due back to my library, and then I ended up putting it off until the last 4 days that I had it checked out, and convinced myself that I could somehow finish it in that short span of time. Did not happen, obviously. So I ended up buying it on my Kobo, but I don't regret that one bit because this was such a good book. Yes, it was huge. Yes, it was filled with information, but not one time while reading this book did I get bored at all. So Helter Skelter was written by the prosecuting lawyer in the Charles Manson case, and Charles Manson, if you don't know, was a cult leader who created a cult called the Family and convinced them to murder people trial for him because he was trying to start a race war called Helter Skelter. He also convinced people that he was Jesus. So this book basically describes the events that took place, like the murders and then also the trial that happened, the people versus Manson, and then the people versus his family, who were the men and women who ended up killing people on his behalf. Definitely a very interesting read. If you're into true crime, I know this book is huge and daunting, but it is so worth it. It is the #1 best-selling true crime novel for a reason. It was so good. I can't stress that enough, honestly. But if you're not into like gory stuff or that disturbs you a lot, I might advise not reading this. I didn't, however, rate it just because it was another one that felt kind of weird to rate. I know it's not really a memoir, but it was true events that took place that are very disturbing, and I just felt kind of uncomfortable rating that. So anyway, 3 completely different books, but 3 very good books in their own ways. Now we are in October, and I am so looking forward to starting spooky books and Halloween and all of that stuff. Let me know in the comments what you read in September. I hope you have a great rest of your week and happy reading.